All right. Happy Mother's Day. I'm so glad you guys are here. My name is Tiffany. My husband, Peter, is the lead pastor here at Hope City Church. And I'm his wife, Tiffany. I don't know if I said that. But Hope City has been open for 2.5 years now, and it has been an amazing journey. And I have the honor and the privilege of working here at Hope City Church. I help oversee the Hope City Kids program. I work with Paige and Amanda. They do an amazing job in there. And if you know my husband at all, I was trying to think yesterday, I'm like, what else do I do at church? And I was like, oh yeah, okay. So Peter, if you know him, has these like big, crazy dreams, like we're going to drop eggs from a helicopter. And I thought it was so cute. I was standing over here like, it's a very spiritual, it's an amazing thing that we do these eggs. I'm the one that's like, how are we dropping eggs onto the field? And how do we get everybody back in? Like, I'm trying to like work through those details. So I assist in helping, thank you, Peter, and all your dreams come true. But I wanted to show you a picture of my 3 kids from this morning. They were bribed, but they smiled. Look at that, so cute. I know you're probably thinking, like, Hope City, like, you guys are all about pictures. You're always taking pictures here. I think we're all about pictures because we think that pictures are a great way to remember God's faithfulness through different seasons of your life. I mean, life is constantly changing. Okay, I want to show you what my life used to look like. These are my little babies. Oh, my goodness. So cute. That one never slept, the little one. Leah never slept. I can't believe by the time I got to the 3rd one, she had her nights and days mixed up. It was rough. All right, but I don't know about you, but when I first had kids, I thought I sort of knew like what life was going to look like. If you're anything like me, maybe you start your new job or you first get married and you just think you know how it's going to be. You know, the possibilities are endless. It's sort of like this white canvas over here, right? It's all new and white and shiny. And, you know, even as a teenager, I can remember laying in bed and being like, I wonder, like, what's my husband going to be like and what's he's going to do? And there you go. There he is right now, right? But we think about that as young adults. We dream about what our life is going to be. You know, I think even as adults, we have this beautiful picture in our head. I have it, right? White shiplap, white couches, no stains, no chaos, just peace in my 4 walls of my home, right? As moms, we think like our kids, before I had kids, oh my goodness, I nannied. So when you nanny, you think you know everything. That's what I did. So I nannied and I was like, oh, I'm never doing that, what they do. But I had this dream of like, my kids are going to be so obedient. Like they're not going to have tantrums. Like they're just going to rise up and call me blessed in the morning, right? Like that's what we think. Like life is just going to be all rainbows and unicorns. Right? So I asked the women of our church, Hope City Sisterhood, I sent them an email and I was like, okay, guys, I need your pictures of like the reality of what motherhood actually looks like. I cannot wait for you to see this. Okay, so I got tons of pictures in the emails. This is little Maya Ruffin, permanent marker, drawing for her mom and dad. This is Quinn Ott putting her mom's makeup on. And this is Ethan crawling through the doggy door of his home. And we also have Sadie, I have a lot of artistic kids here at Hope City Kids. Sadie's painting and Anna Reed's painting. And I just had to put this picture up of Asha and Noah because I have a Noah as well. And this is what my 2 kids look like. Grace always smiled and Noah did not. This is reality right here. Violet Cooper helping her mom organize so well. And Double Trouble with Ty and Mia Alexander just taking over. Riley just getting himself ready for the day. And I could not put this picture up. This is Riley walking the dog. I just thought that was so cute. Side note. Another kid, I had 3 kids walking through doggy doors right there. Ayla painted her nails and her face. Super cute. You got Scarlett in the doggy playpen thing. You got Nora. I love that picture of Nora because how many of our kids did that? Just flat on the ground in the grocery store. And she was like, my doll is also going to be flat on the ground. Now, this I saved for last. This is Maya and Nora covered in diaper rash cream, which is amazing. I mean, these are like the most hilarious and cutest things you've ever seen. You know, so much for this like perfect white canvas, right? This is reality. I mean, this is a picture of Peter with our 2 when they were little. We basically dragged them. Noah never held our hand ever. He was just like on a mission. We had to like pick them up to move them places. It was straight up crazy when your kids are little. It's hard. I was just with my parents a couple weekends ago. I had such a great time. This is a couple, I think last year, when they came down for fake fall in Florida. And we showed them that, like, we just put pumpkins on tables. And they came, and so I just went up to see them in New Jersey a couple weekends ago. And I sat with them, and I was like, Dad, like, I need, like, a really funny story for my message. So, like, what is the funniest thing I ever did as a kid? I don't know why you ask your parents that, but I did. And his eyes got real wide. And he was like, oh, the finger. And I was like, oh, my gosh, I can't believe you remember this. But I was probably like 9 or 10 years old. It's that age where, like, you're on the bus and you see kids doing other things and you don't really know what they mean, but you're like, they look angry and then doing something with their finger over there with their hand. I don't know what it means. Well, my dad had sent me to my room for being disrespectful. And my room, oh, yes, it gets good. I can't believe I'm sharing this at church. So my dad sent me to my room, which is like down the hallway, and I was like so mad, and I just walked down the hallway, and instead of going up the stairs to my room, I was just like, I'm gonna like give him the finger, and I just stuck my hand up in the air, and I just like held it there, because I didn't really know what you were supposed to do. Like, do you just do it and walk away? I just like held it for like 2 minutes, just like held my middle finger up in the air. What I didn't know was that there was a backlight shining on my hand, which had created a gigantic shadow of their daughter standing with their middle finger up in the hallway. And my parents saw the entire thing from the kitchen. I never ran so fast up those stairs when my dad came around the corner screaming. Now, thanks to the grace of God, just so you all know, I don't do that hand gesture anymore. I tell my kids all the time, like, you're going to get caught. Mommy always got caught, and you're going to get caught because I know it all. But that's real life, right? Kids do stuff they're not supposed to do. No matter the plans, the dreams that you have, it just doesn't always work out that way. Dream jobs quickly become the job of your nightmares. Your marriage doesn't end up turning out the way you thought it would. I mean, for real, who has a kid and thinks they're going to give them a gigantic middle finger one day? Like, nobody thinks that. Nobody thinks their kid's going to crawl through a doggy door, right? Nobody gets married and thinks the other person's going to have an affair. Nobody thinks you're going to get a job and watch all of your coworkers manipulate their way to the top. I asked my parents a second question that night. I said, what was the hardest part about parenting? Now, I wanted to show you a vintage picture of my family. This is my mom and dad. My dad looks exactly the same, but more hair. And in this picture, at this point in time, it was myself and my brother and my sister. So my parents at this point had raised all three of us. And what you don't know about this picture is, maybe a year later after this picture, our family changed dramatically. My dad's sister, my aunt, passed away suddenly, and she was a single mom, and she had 2 kids the same age as my brother and sister, 2 boys. So my parents suddenly had 2 9-year-olds, 2 11-year-olds, and an extremely hormonal 14-year-old daughter. And I could not imagine. I mean, my mom just told me this week, I was exactly your age when that happened. So I really wanted to know from my mom, what was so hard about parenting. And my mom's response was so simple, but so profound. She said, the hardest thing was not quitting, was not tapping out, but staying engaged. I sat there listening to her, and I actually had a whole different message planned. And at that moment, I was like, that's what I have to talk about, because that's what I need to hear. I mean, how often do all of us say, I just want to quit? You hear people say it all the time. You have no idea how hard my job is. I just want to quit. You have no idea what my family member said to me. I'm quitting. We're not even going there anymore for Christmas. You have no idea what it's like to be married to this person. It's so hard. I'm quitting. As soon as life begins to be hard, there's just such a massive temptation to quit. When we look at this blank canvas of our life, we want it to look perfect. But that's not reality, right? Reality is life is messy. And I don't know about you, but me, when life begins to sort of feel out of control, I just sort of take control of the steering wheel. But in this case, I take control of the paintbrush. And I decide how I want things to look. I decide, okay, I'm going to put these walls up that are just going to protect me from pain. I'm going to put these walls up that are going to protect my kids from pain. I'm going to decide that, okay, if I do this, then this will happen. I'll create what I think my life needs to be like. We take control because we're so afraid of maybe what God might be asking us to do. We don't want to do something uncomfortable. You know, there's times, honestly, this is insane that I have this conversation in my brain, but sometimes I will say to myself, like, oh, God's going to see that, like, I'm trying, and he's going to, like, respect that I've put these walls up, and he's not going to ask me to do anything uncomfortable outside of these lines, right? Like, he's not going to ask me to get up in here and talk on Mother's Day. You know, but you and I, sometimes, we're tempted to quit because we think we've created this life, and if God asks us to do something outside of that, I'm not doing it anymore. We lose our ability to persevere because we're so tempted to quit. We think it's easier. I want to jump into a story in the Bible about someone who faced that same temptation to quit. You guys have Bibles on your seats. You can go ahead and open up to page 148. It's Joshua chapter 6. You know, we see a man named Joshua who God is speaking to. Joshua, he's best known as Moses' second in command. When Moses passed away, Joshua took over and led the Israelites into the promised land. He's considered the Bible's greatest military leader. And yet he faced a situation like all of us would. We'd be so tempted to quit. I want to read a couple of verses, starting with verse 1 for you. It says, "Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. The Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men, and do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark, and on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them, sound a long blast on the trumpets, and have the whole army give a loud shout. And the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in.'" I mean, it kind of seems crazy. But not crazy in what God's asking him to do, but crazy because, I mean, wouldn't it be so nice to know what the ending's going to be like when God asks you to do something? I mean, here's the problem. We have the privilege of seeing the whole story, but Joshua didn't. I mean, look at what Joshua had to tell the army next. Jump down to verse 10. It says, "But Joshua commanded the army, 'Do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voices. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout.'" I mean, can you imagine Joshua? He's the greatest military leader in the Bible, saying, "We're going to walk around the city for 6 days and we're going to say nothing." I mean, how many of you have ever told your kids to be quiet in the car? It doesn't happen. Even on Mother's Day weekend, it doesn't happen. Okay? But, I mean, it's really easy to do something for one day. It's really hard to get up and to keep doing the same thing day after day. Let's jump down again to verse 14. It says, "So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to camp, and they did this for 6 days." Guys, the men in Joshua's army must have thought he was crazy. You have to understand. Look at this picture, right? I was trying to figure out if these were like angels in the background, but I don't think they are. But look at this picture, right? This is Joshua's army right here. Could you imagine telling them, "Guys, we're not fighting, we're going to walk. And we're going to walk in silence"? I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's like going to Starbucks and like saying, "I'm here to deposit my check in my account." They're going to look at you like you're crazy because that's not what Starbucks baristas do. Honestly, if I was Joshua, I would have quit on day 2. Like, one day of walking around the city not talking, I'd be like, this is crazy, and everyone thinks I'm crazy, right? What he was asking them was almost embarrassing. Keep marching until I tell you to stop, day after day. It's not like every time they marched around the city, a couple bricks started to fall. That didn't happen. Nothing happened. But just because they couldn't see anything happening didn't mean that God wasn't moving. Even though Joshua couldn't see God moving, he displayed perseverance. And what we see from this is the first thing on your notes. It says, God is working while you're walking. Just because God hasn't showed you the ending doesn't mean he stopped walking. You know, Joshua believed that God's words were true, even though he didn't understand why he had to walk in silence. You see, in his walking, he couldn't see God doing anything, but he kept walking. You know, I think there are times in our lives where God, he gives us this small picture. He reveals a small part of how everything's going to come together. You and I, we have to be obedient, even when we don't know what the whole picture is going to look like. We have to keep plugging away. We have to keep going. We have to keep praying. I love this verse in 2 Corinthians 5:7. It's so simple, but it says, "For we walk by faith, not sight." Do you know what this means? The Christian life is not based on seeing, but believing. We keep walking not because of what we see. It's not because we see how everything's going to work out, but it's because we believe, we have faith that God is walking. While we're walking, God is working. I like to, in my head, think, I have this picture, right? That God has these invisible, sovereign hands that are around us all the time. You know, when we say that God is sovereign, it means that he's displaying his ultimate power. God's hand is sovereign because absolutely nothing happens in this universe outside of God's influence and authority. We cannot forget that God's invisible sovereign hands that are leading us and guiding us. Even when it feels like crazy, like you need to march around the city 6 times, or even when it's crazy, you have to raise 2 teenagers at one time. I mean, who would do that? Thank you, Peter. We have to keep walking. God's working while you're walking. You see, Joshua, he could have given up. He could have said, I marched for a day, nothing happens, I'm not doing this again. I'm done. There's no way I'm going to get up and do the same thing and not see any results. You know, just like Joshua circling that city over and over, you know, for me, sometimes my job, my marriage, parenting, it feels like that. You know, how many times am I going to ask my husband to take the trash out on Monday night? How many times am I going to tell my 2 teenagers, if you don't turn your phone on, I can't actually call you, right? That you're seeing into my life right now. You know, but honestly, I bet we're all walking through something right now. Sometimes I think we become blinded to what God is trying to teach us because we're so focused on the circles we're walking around in. We have to stop worrying about what our next step is. We've actually got to get our eyes up from our feet to looking in front of us. I hear people say this to me all the time. I don't know what God has called me to. I do. It's what's right in front of you. Whether that's your job or your marriage or your kids, he's called you to that. And if he's called you to that, you can't give up. God is with you in the walking. And it means that you don't have to stress about where your feet are going because he's already there. We have to keep our eyes up. We have to remember his promises, and we have to persevere. Let's look back in chapter 6 in Joshua. We're going to jump in at verse 15. It says, on the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. Except on that day, they circled the city 7 times. I'm going to jump to verse 20. It says, when the trumpet sounded, the army shouted. And at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. And everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. Guys, we wouldn't even know about this story if Joshua hadn't pushed through till the 7th lap, the 7th day. You know, so many of us, me included, I want to give up on the 3rd day, the 4th day, the 5th day. If my kids are doing the same thing by the 5th day, I'm like, this is not working, right? The process of walking and not knowing when something is going to end, it's incredibly hard. But I think so many of us, we don't realize that we may be starting our 7th lap around Jericho. And that blessing that God has for us is right around the corner. If Joshua had stopped on the 5th day, he would have missed it. Don't miss the blessing because you've forgotten that God is in the process. You and I, we have to embrace the process. I look at this canvas. Sometimes we only have a small glimpse of how things are going to work out. But praise God Almighty, he sees the whole picture. He sees how it's all going to come together. Joshua shows us there's always going to be a temptation to quit. Embracing that process of waiting is hard when you don't know the ending. Okay, so it's sort of like the best analogy I could come up with is potty training, okay? I knew by the time I had my third kid, I could get her to kindergarten without a diaper on. Like, I knew, I did it 2 times before, I knew I could do that. It was still so hard. That process of potty training, my third was the hardest out of all 3, but I can remember this one time, her sitting on this little plastic potty and me just staring at her because I didn't know what else to do. And I'm looking at her, and I've got like a box of Munchkins, which was like her reward, like staring at her in the face. And I'm like, come on, you can do it. I'm also like shoving water down her mouth at the same time to like help the process. But I remember that girl, Leah, sat there for 60 minutes that day, okay? Nothing. And when I got up to go get myself something to drink, she got up and peed next to the potty. That was how that worked with Leah and I. But I'm telling you, even though I knew I could eventually get her potty trained, it didn't make the process any easier. I wanted to quit. I called Peter many times crying about potty training, because even though, we just know the process is hard, even sometimes when we know it's going to happen. Sometimes I think, would we only continue to walk if we knew the breakthrough was going to happen? I think we want answers. A lot of the time, I want answers. God wants obedience. Listen, the process, it is hard. It can be messy. It's stretching. I love this verse in Romans 5. It says, we glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, in turn, produces character, and character, hope. You see, suffering, it's the state of undergoing pain and distress and hardship. I don't want you to miss this. God isn't saying when your heart is in pain, rejoice, okay? He's saying when your heart is in pain, you need to rejoice in the assurance of God's grace and provision. Because it's pain and hardship that lead to perseverance. And that produces character. Because there is so much power in perseverance. Guys, Jesus has conquered every challenge so you can move from the present situation to a life of overflowing hope. I think as parents, I do this, I'm guilty of this. I think as parents, we look at our kids sometimes and we call out the negative things that we see. I say, he's so stubborn. She is so stubborn. You don't even know. But God, he sees a leader being trained, right? We call out, we say, this is their weakness. This is what they're struggling with. And God's like, no, I'm going to be faithful through this. We see our kids and we're like, they're difficult. And because they got answers to everything, they want to give their opinion about everything. But God's like, listen, I'm making problem solvers. They're going to change the world. Adults, we do this about ourselves. We see pain, and it's all we can see, right? It's all we can see. There's pain in my life. There's pain here. There's pain here. And God's like, no, wait. I just see strength that I'm trying to form. We see the impossible. And God's like, no, this is just a way for me to display my awesome power. And I really, truly believe that God has bigger plans for our kids, for us, than we could even imagine. As a mom with young kids, you saw them when they were young. They were just sitting in the front row last service. But I can remember stressing about things when they were little. I was like, they're only going to eat organic snacks, and they got to get into the best preschool, and they got to get on the right middle school team, and they got to make the right sports team, right? I wanted to control everything because I thought that if I controlled it, then I would protect them from the pain of the world. But the reality is God, he's so much bigger than all of that. Listen, I love healthy food, and I love education, and I love athletics. But those aren't the things that God's worried about. He just wants us to point their feet and their hearts towards him. He wants us to point be pointed towards him. Keep pointing your kid's heart towards Jesus. Keep realigning your feet to be in line with him. Stop worrying. I'm telling this to myself. Stop worrying and stop thinking that it's my hands that are the ones controlling everything. You know, I saw my kids, I said this, they were sitting there, and I looked at them and I thought, you know, I can't even begin to imagine what my kids are going to do because I held on and I didn't give up on stuff. You know, but it's true about you too. Think of the stories that your kids are going to one day tell because you embraced the process and you persevered. You know, what stories will your kids tell their kids? There's a legacy there being passed down from generation to generation about how you didn't give up. You know, I'm going to be super vulnerable because that's why I love speaking up here. I spoke last time. Is this picture? I was so mad at Peter. So, okay, is this the worst angle ever, Peter, in the front row taking a picture? This is last year on Mother's Day. And I don't ever like to say I preached because I'm uncomfortable, but I spoke. But in all honesty, right, I preached. It is hard for my brain to even say that sentence because in my mind, those two things don't add up. Like Tiffany does not preach at church, okay? But I did last year, and somehow I'm up here again. But I want to tell you what you don't see is after I spoke on Mother's Day, and even though everybody said I did great, I went through a really hard couple of months after that. I wasn't ready for the emotional dip that sort of happens after you stand up in front of a bunch of people and you're vulnerable. And I became like fixated just thinking about what people were thinking about me and how they viewed me, and it was hard. I didn't know how to process those emotions. I probably was a little depressed for some of that time. I became super isolated. I retreated. I didn't even want to be up on stage giving announcements. I just wanted to hide in the back during church. But one day in the summer, I was walking over at the beach and listening to worship music, and that's sort of like my time with the Lord. And I just remember God reminding me that the only reason that I'm here on earth is to point people to Jesus. And I think in my head sometimes that the reason I'm here on earth is to raise great kids. I am, but that's not my sole purpose. My sole purpose isn't to have a great marriage. My sole purpose isn't to decorate my house to be beautiful. My sole purpose isn't to have a great life. My sole purpose is to point people to Jesus. And you and I, we can do that. But I want to share something. In that moment, it's honestly where God laid on my heart this nudge about creating something at our church for the women. Hope City Sisterhood was sort of birthed out of that really hard time in my life because I just felt like I didn't want another woman to go through a situation in their life where they felt isolated or where they didn't know that God was for them. You know, I didn't know the whole picture. I only felt pain. I didn't understand why God asked me to do something and why did I feel so insecure afterwards. And I couldn't see the whole picture. But God, he was working this whole thing out. You know, last Sisterhood was just a couple weeks ago. We had almost 70 women at Sisterhood. 70 women got to remember that they're not alone and got to know that God was for them, whatever was going on. I don't want you sitting here thinking like, wow, she was so great that she did that. I want you to understand that I felt that pain that I know that some of you feel, where you're just like all you can think about. I couldn't even explain to Peter how I was feeling. But God was working. He was doing something that I couldn't even see. You know, so why do we embrace the pain of the walking? Because there's so much power in perseverance. The power of perseverance is that it's creating a testimony. It's creating a testimony in me. It's creating a testimony in you so we can point other people back to God. Not so everybody can think we're so good or look at what great kids they have or look at this life they created for themselves. I love this definition I found about perseverance that I wanted to share. It says, to persevere is to overcome problems by rethinking a hopeless situation and giving it time instead of rushing foolishly into the unknown. To persevere is to give time for the shock value to go away and realize that things may not be hopeless. To carry on, to keep swimming, and to become patient. Guys, there's power in perseverance. You know what the author doesn't know right here is that if you have Jesus in you, then the impossible, it's already possible. If you have Jesus, you're willing to circle around that city 100 times because you believe that God is leading you somewhere. If you have Jesus, you can persevere because he ultimately persevered over death. Don't think, I think this all the time, but I'm telling you, do not think this. Do not think that God only works with the talented. He works with people that persevere. The Bible is full of stories of normal people that in their faith and their perseverance, God did incredible things with their life. Godly perseverance is the day after day faithfulness to get up and do what is needed, regardless of the obstacle. This is the best part, to bring glory and honor to God. Thank goodness my parents didn't give up on me. If you think the middle finger was the worst it got, it was not. I was an extremely hard teenager to raise. And my poor parents all of a sudden had 4 preteens, and I just went crazy. But they didn't give up. They never checked out. They persevered. They never stopped trying to point my feet in the right direction. Every time I would move them, they would help point them back over and over. I think sometimes as parents, we believe the lie that as our kids get older, our voices become smaller, right? That's a lie that the world tells us, that our kids tell us, right? I don't care what you're saying. Yes, you do. My parents' voice still matters to me to this day. I don't want you to miss this. This is so important. God used my parents' faithfulness, their perseverance, for my fruitfulness. Parents, your job is to grow fruit on your kids' trees and keep pointing their feet to Jesus. Those 18 years, my oldest is going to be 14 in September. Those 18 years go by in a snap. You don't get to put on cruise control during the hard ones. I wish you could. But I want to remind you something, right? This is really the real deal. You never stop being their mom and dad. Never stop praying for them. Never stop cheering them on. Never stop being in their corner. Don't give up. There's so much power in perseverance. This blank canvas of our life, of our kids' life, that we try to control and make look certain ways, it's going to quickly be filled up with things that are out of our control. Pain, disappointment, heartache, seasons of waiting. All of these things that we're going to try and protect ourselves from, we're going to try to protect our kids from. Guess what? God is going to use that all for good. He's going to take each of these things and he's going to weave it into our story. He's painting a picture that we can't even see yet. He's growing us. He's growing me. He's growing you to be more like him. He's creating a beautiful masterpiece of your kids for you. He's taking all those moments that you walked through, all those things you persevered through, and he's creating a beautiful story. You need to remember that he's only letting you see a small part of the bigger picture, and that even in the suffering, there's perseverance that builds character, and there's ultimately hope. There's hope. You could be one more lap away from seeing God's glory and his power being played out. You could be on the 6th lap of your marriage being restored, of job success. You could be one more lap away of defeating your hurts, your hang-ups, your habits. Don't give up. Don't give up on what God is doing in your life, and do not give up on your kids. I don't care how old they are. Do not give up on them. God can do the impossible. Let me remind you, you need to keep walking. You need to persevere because there's hope, and God has a beautiful story that he wants to paint of your life. He's going to take all that pain and all that disappointment and all that heartache, and he's going to redeem it for his glory because you and I, we persevered.